Hello and welcome to the Stack Exchange. My name is Tyler, and today I'm going to be doing a deck tech on one of my favorite decks I've ever built or played, Zada Hedron Grinder. If you want to skip to any other parts of this video, I will put the timestamps for the different parts on screen now. Zada Hedron Grinder is a 4-cost, 3 and a red, 3/3 Goblin ally, with whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada Hedron Grinder, copy that spell for each other creature you control that spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. Zada's game plan is essentially make a lot of creatures, buff those creatures, and swing in for lethal to kill everyone. This was actually the first mono red deck I ever made, and one of the first decks I ever made that included red. This was mainly because I like to play the more grindy, mid-range value kind of decks, and I decided one day that I needed to branch out of this sort of mid-range pocket I've put myself in, and I wanted to try making a mono-red aggro deck, completely different from what I was used to. Before this, I really did not like red, especially as a supporting color to others. I felt it didn't usually do enough for other colors, and I also didn't like mono red because it felt like it was just too weak. It was all just about speed. This all changed after I made this Zada deck. Zada is actually one of the best decks I currently own and play consistently. Zada has a 60% win rate amongst the games I've played with him, this being 6 wins and 4 losses. This deck is full steam ahead. It looks to win before someone else can win or become a problem. This deck is super glass cannon and unbalanced. It does not worry about what other people are doing. It solely works to try and build its board state as quickly as possible to win the game before anyone else has an opportunity to do anything about it. So, what sort of categories do we have in this deck? This deck is mainly broken down into a couple of categories, these being bodies and token generators, ramp, draw, interaction, recursion, pump, miscellaneous, and land. Let's get started with the vegetables of the deck. Interaction. This deck runs a total of 8 pieces of interaction. Like I said, this deck is super glass cannon and does not worry about what other people are doing. The amount of interaction in this deck is extremely low. It is below the bare minimum. It only has a couple of cards to help you remove something that might be slightly problematic or shutting off your deck. To start with, we have 3 board wipes in this deck, those being Blasphemous Act, Vandal Blast, and Mizzium Mortars. Blasphemous Act is the staple red board wipe. It's here to try and clear out a large board state when there is nothing we can do about it. Since our creatures and board state are extremely important to us, this is usually a last-ditch effort if there is nothing we can do about the current board state of our enemies. There is, however, a slight chance that you are able to buff up your creatures enough to tank the 13 damage that Blasphemous Act does, but I have never personally experienced this while playing a game. The next board wipe is Vandal Blast. Vandal Blast removes an artifact you don't control and can also be overloaded. This is to help remove any problematic artifacts and slow down our opponents by blowing up any mana rocks they may have. It's also very crucial to point out that it does not target your own stuff, because we do not want to destroy our own artifacts since mana is very important for this deck to get through stuff quickly. The last board wipe is Mizzium Mortars, which deals 4 damage to target creature you don't control, or you can overload it. This is mainly to ping down a bunch of weak creatures your opponents control. It can be used to remove something of value for your opponent that has a low toughness, or it can be used to clear out a bunch of tokens so that you can then swing in on your turn. Next up, we have 2 pieces of general removal, these being Abrade and Chaos Warp. Abrade is another red staple which can be used to remove small problematic value creatures as well as artifacts. Chaos Warp is the best removal spell in this deck since it can target any permanent and shuffle it away, so it does not go to a graveyard, for instance, where an opponent could just replay it. The next couple of removal pieces are attached to some sort of buff spell. So these kind of play double duty. They can either be used to buff your team or be used to remove something problematic. These are Raise the Effigy and Dreadmaw's Ire. Raise the Effigy can be used to destroy target artifact or buff an attacking creature +2/+2, which is a pretty decent buff. The only downside to it being that it has to be attacking creature, but that's not too big of a problem. The other spell is Dreadmaw's Ire, which buffs and gives trample to an attacking creature. And when that attacking creature deals combat damage to a player, you can destroy one of the artifacts they control. In most cases, when you're swinging out with Zada using this card, it is a sort of artifact board wipe for your opponents. Because if your creatures are getting through, and you have a ton of creatures, you're going to be able to destroy almost all of the artifacts that they have. The last removal piece is Red Elemental Blast. Red Elemental Blast can destroy target blue permanent or counter a blue spell. This is mainly here to stop a counter spell or something like Cyclonic Rift or Aetherize, something big that could significantly slow down the game plan of your deck. The next category is Ramp. So I'd like to preface that most of the ramp in this deck functions like a ritual, since they are spells that target Zada and create some sort of mana or treasure token. Since we have a bunch of creatures, when we target Zada, we will copy those spells and make a ton of mana or a ton of treasure tokens. So that makes up a majority of the ramp in this deck, so it's a lot of ritual style ramp. These ritual style ramps include Ancestor's Aid, Traitorous Greed, Flick a Coin, and Sudden Breakthrough. Each of these make a treasure token, aside from Traitorous Greed, which allows you to give haste to your creatures and produces 2 mana per creature. The next group of ramp is what I call Zada Adjacent Ramp, since it relies on the spells we are casting on Zada, kind of like the previous ritual-like spells. These Zada adjacent spells include Stormkiln Artist and Runaway Steamkin. Stormkiln Artist has the Magecraft keyword for whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you create a treasure token. This is amazing in Zada, and it actually is one of the best cards in this deck. Whenever you cast a spell with Zada and it copies that spell for each of your creatures, you make a treasure token for each of those copied spells. This allows you to turn all of your buff spells essentially into ramp spells when you have him out. Runaway Steamkin also produces a small amount of mana while buffing itself up. Whenever you're casting red spells, you're putting counters on it, and then you can end up removing 3 counters to add 3 red mana. Since this deck is all about small buff spells, that usually means that you can cast a bunch of 1-cost buff spells, remove the counters, and repeat this process. The next ramp spell is an actual ritual, Battle Hymn. Battle Hymn adds a red for each creature you control. This combos very well with Krenko Mob Boss, since he makes a ton of creatures, which you can then use Battle Hymn to get a bunch of mana from. It kind of also functions the same as those Zada-reliant rituals that I mentioned previously that will make a treasure token for each of your creatures. Because Krenko makes a bunch of tokens for this deck that can be targeted with Zada's ability or using Battle Hymn, my dedicated pod actually jokes that when I play Krenko, it suddenly becomes a Krenko deck instead of a Zada deck. Next, we have 2 discount artifacts, those being Ruby Medallion and Hazoret's Temple. Both of these reduce the cost of my red spells by 1. This is mainly to help with casting creatures on your turn, and to turn the couple of 2-cost red buff spells to 1-cost red buff spells, which can save you a lot of mana on turns you want to storm off. Hazoret's Monument has the additional bonus of having a sort of pseudo-bad looting effect attached to it whenever you cast a creature spell. The remaining ramp of this deck are just your sort of generic mana rocks. These include Heraldic Banner, Arcane Signet, Mind Stone, Springleaf Drum, Thought Vessel, Liquimetal Torque, Soul Ring. Among these, Heraldic Banner gives a small anthem to your creatures, Liquimetal Torque can turn non-land permanents into artifacts, making your removal significantly better than it was previously. And Thought Vessel gives you no maximum hand size, so if you ever get stopped in the middle of a storm turn, you don't have to discard all of those buff spells you have in hand. You can hang on to them for the next storm turn. Like with Ramp, most of the draw spells in this deck care about targeting Zada and copying them for every creature you control. Flick a Coin, like mentioned previously, is a very good card for this. It creates a treasure token and draws you a card. It does have the drawback of dealing 1 damage to each of your creatures, so usually you need to play some sort of buff spell to buff the toughness of your creatures, since a lot of your creatures will be 1/1 tokens. Like with Ramp and Interaction, a couple of these draw spells do double duty. 3 of these draw spells provide haste as well. These include Expedite, Accelerate, and Crimson Wisps. All of these give your creatures haste and draw you a card. This works really well when you're making tokens on your turn, because then you can swing in with said tokens. There are also an additional 3 buff spells that also have draw tacked onto them. These include Ancestral Anger, Might of the Meek, and Fist of Flames. Ancestral Anger and Might of the Meek do not give a huge buff. Honestly, Might of the Meek never really gives you a power buff, since this deck does not run any mice. The important thing is that both of them give trample to your creatures. This allows you to bypass most blockers. By contrast, Fist of Flames gives a huge buff to your team. Not only does it draw you a card for each of your creatures, it also gives all of them trample and an additional power for every single card you've drawn this turn. So, if you had 3 creatures out and you cast Fist of Flame, you would draw 3 cards, and then including that first draw you get at the start of your turn, all of your creatures would have an additional 4 power. This number can be increased to exponential heights because of the amount of draw spells you will cast each turn, continuing to buff up your team. The rest of the draw in this deck is typical generic red draw, these being Jeska's Will, Hazoret's Monument, War Room, and Valcult Awakening. Jeska's Will is the best of these, since it also doubles as a ritual, giving you a bunch of mana, allowing you to storm off significantly earlier than you normally would be able to. War Room, though it is a bit slow for the deck, can consistently give you a bit of draw, and as you will see later, some of the buff spells also have scry on them, so you can reorder the top of your deck to how you like, and then use War Room to draw that card if need be. It can be really helpful to just try and give you 1 extra card if you suddenly run out of gas while you're storming off. Valcult Awakening can kind of be used to wheel yourself, get rid of any cards you don't need in hand while drawing you some more cards. It also doubles as a land if you're a little mana screwed and don't have enough lands on board. The next category is bodies or token makers. The first major grouping of these are what I call token bodies. These are creatures or enchants that make you tokens. So essentially, for the price of like 1 body, you get several more. These include Beetleback Chief, Frontline Heroism, Goblin Instigator, Legion War Boss, Krenko Mob Boss, Squee Dubious Monarch, Young Pyromancer, Dwarven Mine, and Care Keep. Krenko Mob Boss is one of the best of these token makers, since he can create tons of goblins each turn and continues to make more and more for you. Frontline Heroism is very nice in this deck because whenever you cast a spell that's targeting only Zada, it will create a 1/1 red soldier with haste, that's very important, and copy that spell to target that token. So not only are you getting a token you can swing in with this turn, it is also getting double the spell you are casting on Zada. This is because 1, it gets the copy from Frontline Heroism. 2nd, it gets the copy from Zada's trigger. So these tokens start to get buffed up a little extra on top of everything, and they also come in with haste, which is super, super good in this deck. The last of these that is very impactful is Young Pyromancer, which makes you a elemental every time you cast an instant or sorcery. Unlike Friendlight Heroism, it doesn't make you a hasted token, but it does create tokens. So if you end up casting more ramp or draw spells, you get more value out of it, even if those tokens aren't able to swing. Dwarven Mine is a land that makes you a dwarf creature token when it enters, and its condition to enter untapped is to control 3 or more mountains. In a mono-red deck, where most of the lands are mountains, this is a non-problem. Additionally, it counts as a mountain itself, so you really only need 2 mountains. Carekeep is here as a little way to dump some mana on turns where you're not having anything to cast, so you can have more bodies for later turns. The next category of bodies is what I call quality bodies. These are creatures that instead of prioritizing quantity, prioritize quality of creature. These include Goblin Warchief and Goblin Chieftain, which provide haste, an anthem, and a discount for your goblins. Since this deck is a pseudo-goblin deck, this affects most of the creatures you control. The next 2 quality creatures are the 2 kobolds. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce their names because of how many times I've messed it up. But the sun on the left has First Strike, Menace, and Trample. All it needs is to be buffed up. The one on the right has Battlecry, buffing your creatures even more when attacking, and has the added bonus that it can be used to make you a couple of extra creatures if need be. The next 2 creatures are utility-based, those being Goblin Matron and Goblin Chirurgeon. That's another name that I still struggle with. Well, Goblin Matron allows you to tutor, and the Goblin Surgeon allows you to regenerate your goblins. I should point out that the Goblin Matron only tutors for a goblin, but once again, this is kind of like tutoring for most creatures in this deck. Something cool I would also like to point out is that the Goblin Surgeon can regenerate any target creature, so you can use it to regenerate an opponent's creature. I used that once to try and slow down the effect of a board wipe to help keep everyone from falling behind the person who played the board wipe. The last of the quality bodies is Slickshot Show Off. This is a awesome card from Thunder Junction. It is a 1/2 with flying and haste, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets an additional 2 power until end of turn. So not only is it getting stronger off the buff spells played on it, it is also getting stronger just because you are casting those buff spells. It also very conveniently has the plot keyword, allowing you to cast this spell from your hand on a prior turn, and then being able to play it out later, thus keeping it kind of safe in this sort of limbo exile area. This also saves you mana on turns you want to storm off, because you can just play it for free from exile, and then start casting your spells with that mana untapped, instead of having to tap an additional 2 to play it. The last 2 quality bodies of this deck are the ping bodies. These ping your enemies. These are Gutter Snipe and Giggling Skitter Spike. Gutter Snipe will ping each of your opponents for 2 whenever you're casting your instant and sorcery spells, and Giggling Skitter Spike will ping all of your opponents whenever it attacks, blocks, or becomes the target of a spell. And it will ping each of them equal to its power. This works super well in the deck and is sort of a hidden commander of the deck, because as you buff it, the amount of damage it is throwing each time it gets buffed increases more and more. On top of that, they gave it indestructible for some reason. I don't know what Wizards was thinking. This card is amazing. Moving on to buff spells. To start with, let's go over the ones we already covered. Those are Ancestor's Aid, Ancestral Anger, Dreadmaw's Ire, Fist of Flame, Might of the Meek, Raise the Effigy, and Sudden Breakthrough. These we all previously discussed because they fall into one of the already discussed categories. Now let's move on to the buff spells that give your creatures keywords, whether that be something like Trample or Haste or something of the like. These spells are Assault Strobe, Monstrous Rage, Summit Sprint, and Whirling Strike. Assault Strobe just gives your creatures double strike, essentially doubling their power and giving them a first strike effect to kill something that might usually trade with them. Monstrous Rage gives +2 power and creates a monstrous roll token attached to the creature, giving it a +1/+1 and trample buff. Summit Sprint gives haste, and Whirling Strike gives first strike and trample. All of these cards are very good in the deck. Keywords work very well. On top of that, they all give a pretty decent buff to power. Now for the non-keyword buff spells, these being Antagonize, Brute Force, Built to Smash, Infuriate, Titan Strength, and Unleash Fury. All of these give a large buff in power and toughness to our creatures, while Unleash Fury doubles the power of the creature. I would like to point out that Built to Smash does technically give trample to an artifact creature, but the only artifact creature in this deck is Giggling Skitterspike, and I guess technically you could also end up with an artifact creature if you use Liquid Metal Torque on your own creature. But since this is usually a negligible effect, I decided to put it under the non-keyword buff spells. Now onto some of the miscellaneous cards. To start, we have Isochronic Scepter and Kari Zev's Expertise. Isochronic Scepter is here to give the deck a little bit of longevity. You can attach a ramp or draw spell to it, which you can then use on subsequent turns, allowing you to keep that card and keep using it. Kari Zev's Expertise is great because it gives your creatures haste, as well as allowing you to cast any card from your hand with mana cost 2 or less without paying its mana cost. This can be used to dump out small creatures, or what it is usually used for is to cast a bunch of free buff spells. If you have a bunch of creatures, this really helps you storm off because you don't need to worry about mana for a while since you're not using mana to cast your spells. The next miscellaneous spell is Soul's Flame. Soul's Flame is used to help close out games. It has target creature, deals damage equal to its power to any target. You can use this to sort of fling the damage your creatures would do to an opponent straight to their face. This works really well if your opponents have something like Propaganda, Ghostly Prison, or some other way to stop you from attacking. Next, we have Recursion. These are the bread and butter of the deck. They are what allow you to storm off very consistently and keep the deck running smoothly. These are Underworld Breach and Past in Flames. Underworld Breach is great in this deck because of how much you can constantly reuse the same spells. I also believe Past in Flames should be really good. I've actually never had the opportunity to cast it during a game. I usually end up drawing Underworld Breach and just using that since it is cheaper and also allows me to use the same spell multiple times. Now, let's get on to lands. This deck has a total of 35 lands, one of which is a MDFC, Vala Cult Awakening, which we mentioned previously. It also contains 29 basic mountain cards. There are 6 utility lands in this deck, some of which we have mentioned previously. Those include War Room, Care Keep, Dwarven Mine, and the ones we haven't mentioned previously are Path of Ancestry, Reliquary Tower, and Cavern of Souls. Since this is a pseudo-goblin deck, Path of Ancestry essentially allows you to scry whenever you cast a creature using it. Reliquary Tower allows you to hold on to some of those cards that you would lose if your storm turn fails, or you just suddenly run out of gas without enough to kill everyone. Cavern of Souls makes your goblin creatures uncounterable. This really helps Zada stick since he is a very large target for removal and counter spells. And that is it for the deck list itself. Now let's move on to how this deck plays out. Usually turn 1 you're going to play a mountain and you want to play some sort of body or ramp spell. Usually the only ramp spell you could play is Soul Ring, so it's usually going to be one of your 1-cost bodies. On turn 2, you're going to try and play some sort of ramp, whether it be Ruby Medallion, something like an Arcane Signet, something to help you get a little bit of mana and get moving faster. You could also play a body on this turn if you would like and you don't have any sort of ramp. On turn 3, you want to try and play more bodies out. You want to try and increase your board state as wide as you can make it during this turn. If you have any spare mana, you can try spending it on a few more ramp pieces. Now, on turn 4, you should hopefully have 4 mountains and a little bit of ramp. This is when you're going to cast your commander, you're going to cast Zada out, and then you're going to want to either cast one of those draw rituals or a mana ritual. This all depends on how much you ramped and what kind of cards you have in hand. If you've ramped enough to where you feel like you can get away with playing the draw spell first, you should play the draw spell first because you might draw into better ramp rituals. If you do not have enough mana to continue after playing that draw spell, you should instead try and play a ramp spell first, allowing you to then cast a draw spell, helping you to continue storming off. This pattern of casting a ramp ritual and a draw ritual continues until you have a big enough board state to kill your enemies. You can usually continue this storming off turn until you've essentially drawn your whole deck. Things to look out for that can help you with this storming off is any recursion pieces or any haste enablers and token generators. Recursion pieces will allow you to recast your draw and mana spells, getting double value for them. Token makers will increase your board state, and haste enablers will, give haste to those tokens, allowing you to continue to build a tall and wide board state to swing out your opponents with. Now, it's been a while since I started playing with this deck list, and there are a few things I think I should switch out, and I wanted to share those switches with you. The main thing I believe I should add to this deck are Bolt Bend-like effects. Bolt Bend is a card that allows you to change the target of a spell or ability with a single target. The more I play Zada and are dedicated to pod, the more of an increasing threat he becomes. People have now mentioned that they mulligan for removal solely to use on Zada and no one else. These Bolt Bend-like effects will allow you to better protect Zada and any other creatures you may have. So what other cards do I mean when I say Bolt Bend-like effects? Well, I mean Deflecting Swat, Return the Favor, Untimely Malfunction, Ricochet Trap, Shunt, Wild Ricochet, and Wile's Reversal. All of these do some variation of the change the target of the spell. Some of them give you an extra copy, some of them do other things as well. But at their core, they all sort of redirect a spell that targets a creature. So, what actual switches would I make? Well, for starters, I would remove Isochronic Scepter, Red Elemental Blast, and Mizzium Mortars. Isochronic Scepter is typically too slow to be used in Zada matches when you want to be spending that mana on something more productive. You don't usually want to spend 4 mana to get a spell that will typically cost you 1 mana. Also, since Zada is such a glass cannon, the slight bit of extra sustainability that Isochronic Scepter provides is very negligible in the deck. On top of that, Isochronic Scepter is a combo piece, not in this deck, but in a lot of other decks, so a lot of people target it for removal very quickly. Red Elemental Blast, it kind of hurts me to cut it since it has saved me before, but it just feels a little too narrow with it only targeting blue things. The other Bolt Bend-like effects can target other things. This isn't to say that Red Elemental Blast does not have its merits. I might later see if I can still keep it in the deck since it can counter a spell. The Bolt Bend effects don't change the targets of something like a board wipe since it doesn't target any one specific creature. And in those situations, Red Elemental Blast works very well. The last one I plan to remove, Mizzium Mortars, is just a little slow for the deck. Like I said, this deck focuses on being like 0 interaction, and most of the mana of this deck is used on your storm turns. By the time I have 6 mana to cast the Overload on Mizzium Mortars, I usually hope to be winning the game at that point and not needing this card. It still does have merit in the fact that you can use it to remove token boards and to help clear out blockers and kill smaller things, but I have not found myself getting enough utility out of the card to justify keeping it in the deck. The cards I would add are Deflecting Swat, Return the Favor, and Untimely Malfunction. These, in my opinion, are 3 of the best Bolt Bend-like effects for this deck. Deflecting Swat is completely free if you have your commander out, which is what you're usually going to be using it to defend. So it is almost always a free spell since you're not going to really be using it to defend anything else. Return the Favor is a spree spell, so it has some versatility. You can either use it to redirect a spell or copy one of your instant or sorceries to double the buff. Or, if you have enough mana, you can do both. And lastly, Untimely Malfunction is a great card. I honestly believe that it is a red staple. Not only does it work as removal, it also allows you to redirect a spell, like mentioned previously, or make creatures unable to block. That's all for the switches that I wanted to make. I will put in the description below the current deck list and the original deck list. The original deck list has a little bit less token generation and draw, so it is a little less consistent. But if you want a slightly more budget and slightly lower power deck, feel free to go ahead. I would just suggest that you keep in mind that the balance of cards were not particularly right in that deck, which is why I rebuilt the deck. Another thing I would like to say is that in the current version of the deck, the 2.0 version of the deck, the price tag that it shows on Mox is not the actual price tag, since I switched all of the arts on there to ones I hope to get eventually. So the price is a little inflated when you look at it there. Compared to the $255 price tag that Mox shows up front, the actual cost of the cards when quickly put into a TCG player cart comes out to around $175. So it definitely has some cost to the deck, and that brings us to the end of the video. I would like to first apologize for the delay in this video. I had some trouble uploading it. And the more I sat on the video, the more I realized that I wasn't happy with the level of quality the video was at, so I had to redo the video. So this video is coming out several days late. We should still have a video coming out this Friday like usual, so I would just like to apologize for that. Finally, thank you for watching. I thoroughly enjoyed being able to share with you all one of my favorite decks. If you have any comments about switches or anything else about the deck, please put them down below. I would love to hear from you. And if you would like to eventually see a gameplay video one day using this deck or any of the other decks we will show throughout our videos, please put that in the comments below so we know you want to see that kind of content. That is all from me. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.